I'm John Strum, and this is Real Talk MS. It's September 17th, and we have a lot to talk about. I'm in Copenhagen, Denmark today, preparing for ECTRIMS, the largest MS research conference in the world. ECTRIMS is an acronym for the European Committee for Treatment and Research in Multiple Sclerosis. And beginning tomorrow, somewhere between 9,000 and 10,000 MS researchers from all over the world will arrive for 3 days of research presentations, discussions, and networking. We're anticipating hearing a couple of major announcements at this scientific congress. One of those announcements will be the release of the detailed data behind the successful outcome of a phase 3 clinical trial for tolebrutinib, which represents a new category of disease-modifying therapy with some unique properties that make it especially noteworthy. The other announcement will be an update to the criteria for diagnosing MS, known as the McDonald criteria. The McDonald criteria was last updated in 2017, and we're looking forward to getting an idea of how the McDonald criteria will change and how those changes will impact clinical practice in diagnosing MS. Among the many experts that I'll be talking with over the next few days, you'll hear from the principal investigator of that phase 3 clinical trial for tolebrutinib, and you'll hear from a member of the committee that's responsible for updating the McDonald criteria for diagnosing MS. So you can look forward to getting a first-hand bird's-eye view of the news that's being made at ECTRIMS 2024. Looking ahead for a moment, Monday, September 23rd marks the 7th anniversary of this podcast. And even as I say it, it seems almost unbelievable. In next week's episode, I'll share some reflections on reaching that milestone, along with some announcements about some of the new things that are in store for Real Talk MS in 2025, when we'll have another milestone to celebrate as we reach our 400th episode. Living with the unpredictability of MS can sometimes feel like riding a roller coaster. And during that roller coaster ride, as you're experiencing the twists and turns of life with MS, you can sometimes feel unmoored from the person you thought you were. These unplanned and unpredictable changes can leave you feeling a little lost and disconnected from your own life. You can sense your priorities, your motivations, and values are shifting. And in those moments, it becomes easy to lose your sense of purpose. Joining me to discuss how to identify and reconnect with your core values so that you're living a more purposeful and satisfying life is a clinical assistant professor and rehabilitation psychologist at the University of Michigan, Dr. Evan Smith. But before we get to my conversation with Dr. Smith, there are a few other things that you should know about. Creating Order, a group exhibit by artists who are living with MS, is opening on September 28th at the DNJ Gallery in Santa Monica, California. Some of my favorite artists are being featured in this exhibit. The list of artists includes Kate Durack, Lydia Emily, Adam St. George, Lindsay Joy Holcomb, Catherine T. Jacobs, Elizabeth Jameson, Ananda Carabo, Kira Milich, Anna Maria Prono, Omaira Rivera-Filardi, Shanna Stern, and the lead artist in the exhibit, Susan Trackman. I had a chance to talk with the co-curators of this exhibit, Pam Schoenberg and Ted Meyer, along with the lead artist in the exhibit, Susan Trackman. In a moment, we'll hear that conversation. Creating Order is an art exhibition featuring works by artists who are living with MS. It opens on September 28th at the DNJ Gallery in Santa Monica, California. And joining me to talk about this exhibition are artist Susan Trackman and the co-curators of the exhibition, Pam Schoenberg and Ted Meyer. Susan, Pam, Ted, welcome to the podcast.
Hi.
Great to be here.
Yes.
Pam, let's start with you. You're the owner of DNJ Gallery, and you've made a decision to use the gallery for a specific purpose, or maybe I should say with a specific goal in mind. Can you tell us about the direction you've taken the gallery in?
Yeah, I've made a commitment actually to utilize art to teach an understanding of chronic disease. I wanted to provide a platform for the patient, for the chronic disease patients with their voices.
So was there a specific inciting incident or event or reason that made you choose this path to use the gallery space this way?
Yeah, during COVID, I closed the gallery, and I no longer saw, a purpose so much, as you could say. And I went back to school, and I've always been interested in nutrition and more preventative nutrition, and as medicine. And there's lots of my family members that actually have a chronic disease, that have Crohn's disease. My husband, my brother, my two sons. And so we've been using nutritionists instead of doctors. So I was already interested in health, and I still had my love and my passion for art. And I wanted to join them both together. And I thought then I saw an exhibit with that Ted curated. And I thought this was a good thing to do.
Well, Ted, what can you tell me about creating order?
Well, first, I'm thrilled. I'm glad to be working with both Pam and Susan. It's a great opportunity. So I'm very lucky to have met Pam, who wants to sort of reach out to the community. So I also have a chronic illness. I have Gaucher's disease. And when I was younger, I was sick, and I did artwork about me. And then some new treatments came about, and I, much like Pam, decided I wanted to give other people a chance to tell their stories about their illness. So Pam had walls, and I had the curatorial knowledge of how to find these people. But that's sort of it. I wanted to take my expertise in storytelling about illness that I used to have for myself and help other people tell their stories. Because as Pam will tell you, running a gallery is difficult. Selling art is difficult to start with, and selling art about other people's illnesses is even harder. So Pam is doing an amazing thing. And luckily, she sought me out after I had curated a show at the Torrance Art Museum by artists with illness. So it's a perfect match. Now, Susan and I had worked before when I was curating shows at both UCLA and USC, where I am currently the artist in residence. So art about medicine is my whole thing. And luckily, I get to meet all these amazing people.
This exhibit actually features a few of my favorite people, Elizabeth Jamieson, Lydia Emily, Kira Milich. Ted, how many artists are being featured?
So what we've done is, for each of these shows, Pam and I have found a lead artist. In this case, it's Susan. So we've combined our Rolodexes so Susan can tell you more about the artists that are there. It just seemed like a better idea to have one of the artists with each featured illness be the lead point. So I'll let Susan take it from here.
Susan, I'll throw the question your way. How many artists are being featured? How did you go about selecting them?
So there are 12 artists being featured. And I did some research. I used Instagram and found some artists on Instagram. And through those artists, found some other artists. And also through the MS Society, I found artists. So that's how I was able to put together the 12 artists.
Well, Susan, as Ted mentioned, you're the lead artist whose work is going to be part of this exhibit. First, can I ask when you were diagnosed with MS?
I was diagnosed in 1988.
I have a two-part question for you, Susan. How
Yes, sir.
has your MS affected your art? And how do you think your art might have affected your MS?
They're kind of, the answer is almost one and the same. So over time, I've lost a lot of control of different parts of my body. And through art, I was able to create order and predictability. And patterns happen to be one of my favorite types of art that I enjoy creating. And there's a lot of order that's involved in a pattern, even if it's random. Having had a background in art, I was an interior designer and went through art school at UCLA. And after having kids, I was on a particular medicine. And over time, I began to start saving my Copaxone bottles and knew one day I would make something with them. And once I was able to do that, I started to create my pieces. And shortly after that, I really wanted to show my work to friends, to family, to others, and ended up meeting Ted. And he was very gracious to offer me an opportunity to have a solo show at UCLA. And I quickly began to get to work to put together my art. But on the other end, art takes me away from focusing on my body and the things that I can't control. I want to say it's my happy place, if you will. It's been very cathartic for me to be able to create art.
So, Susan, what's your message to people who will be coming to the DNJ Gallery to view this exhibit? Or maybe I should ask, is your message going to be contained in the work that we see?
I think that that's the answer.
That's fair enough. In addition to the exhibition itself, there are some special activities planned for the MS community. Pam, what can you tell us about those?
Well, we have an art exhibit. And besides that, we have a talk between Susan and one of her doctors, and Ted's facilitating. And then we have five or more. We have five confirmed at this point. Different workshops, and the workshops are all with the MS community in mind. And like chair yoga is one. There's muscle release without, stretching. There's a drawing MS. There's, I don't. Do I know all the names? There's several workshops that are confirmed right now, and like I said, we're working on some more. I wanted to add more of a health component to the exhibit. Of course, I love art, and I'm so excited for this art exhibit. But because it's called Art and Med, I wanted to add some medicine, some health as well.
And where can people find more information about the exhibit and everything you have going on at the gallery?
I have some things listed on the DNJ website. It's dnjgallery.net. And then at the opening reception. So definitely come to the opening reception. I'm going to have as many details as possible.
Well, Pam, Ted, thank you both for creating a show that's going to not only showcase some remarkable works of art, but will also raise awareness about MS and even provide activities programming for people who are living with MS. Susan, I want to thank you for sharing your story by sharing your talent. And I want to thank you all for taking the time to talk with me today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
The exhibit is open Thursdays through Saturdays from noon to 5 p.m. through December 7th, and the opening reception takes place Saturday, September 28th from 5 to 8 p.m. For further details, be sure to visit the DNJ Gallery website at dnjgallery.net, and you'll find that link in today's show notes. While we're talking about standout events, let's switch to the East Coast so I can tell you about MS Stand Up, a night of stand-up comedy that's taking place on Monday, September 30th from 6 to 9:30 p.m. at the Gotham Comedy Club in Manhattan. You'll be treated to an evening of laughter, cocktails, and hors d'oeuvres with 5 amazing comedians, all sponsored by the nonprofit Mind Brain Philanthropic Foundation. Proceeds from the evening support groundbreaking research underway at Weill Cornell Medical College in New York City, where investigators are developing non-invasive blood and imaging tests to help neurologists identify specific medications for people early in their MS journey, potentially delaying the onset of disability and decreasing or even eliminating long-term neurodegeneration. If you're interested in learning more, buying a ticket, or even a sponsorship, you can visit msstandup.org, and you'll find that link in today's show notes. Taking in art or comedy are just 2 ways you might reconnect with your true inner self. In a moment, my guest, Dr. Evan Smith, will join us with strategies to re-engage with your core values and find your way toward living a more purposeful life when you're living with MS. Learning to live well with MS can sometimes feel like learning to live well while you're riding a roller coaster. And during that roller coaster ride, your priorities, motivations, and values can shift as you experience all the twists and turns of life with MS. These shifts can lead to feelings of loss of self or loss of purpose. My guest today is Dr. Evan Smith. Dr. Smith is a clinical assistant professor and rehabilitation psychologist, and he's a co-investigator on a National MS Society training grant that funds neuroimmunology fellowships. Dr. Smith specializes in identifying values to help live a more purposeful and satisfying life. Welcome to the podcast, Evan.
Thank you so much, John. It's a pleasure to be here and to speak with you and your audience.
Your work focuses on helping individuals find purpose and satisfaction by making choices that align with their personal values. This starts with understanding acceptance and commitment therapy. So let's start there. What is acceptance and commitment therapy, and how can it benefit someone living with MS?
Yeah, so acceptance and commitment therapy, and sometimes it's known as ACT, is an evidence-based therapy for several psychiatric diagnoses, including anxiety and depression and other experiences that affect people living with MS, like quality of life, stress, and pain. Often, when faced with adversity, we have this very well-intended instinct to change what's happening so that we hopefully feel better. Though there are many situations that we just did not vote for, and they continue to happen despite our best efforts. And this can leave someone feeling a bit helpless or hopeless or anxious when there isn't a really clear way to navigate a particular problem we're having. It could lead us to avoid some aspects of our life that would be meaningful experiences if we felt more comfortable leaning into the discomforts that might come along with a condition like MS. ACT aims to empower a person to use their coping resources in a way that helps them to relate to their thoughts, feelings, and emotions by embracing them with curiosity, without judgment. It incorporates mindfulness and acceptance-based processes to engage more fully with how we feel, while simultaneously committing to acting and behaving in ways that support our values, even when we're exposed to really challenging situations. Every person living with MS is the world's foremost expert on themselves and their own lived experience. And as it is with any kind of behaviorally based therapy, the benefits of that can only be appreciated when someone's actively involved in developing these skills. because they're going to know how to best suit these skills to their lifestyle. So for people living with MS, we find that this approach is really well suited because it can lead folks to more strategically use their resources, which can fluctuate on a week-to-week basis or even a day-to-day or hour-to-hour basis. So they can become more skilled in living each day in a value-directed manner, in a way that's adaptable to these ever-changing circumstances.
Committed action acknowledges the different parts of a situation that we can and cannot directly affect. So the most fundamental situation that I can imagine is someone who has just been diagnosed with MS. It's a condition they did not want or consent to, yet a condition that unfortunately exists for them. How does that person come to better terms with their diagnosis?
I would first encourage them to consider that when someone's faced with a health condition like MS that comes with significant challenges and discomfort, it's important to expect that feeling negative emotions are going to be a part of that process. They're going to happen. The process of coming to terms with MS, it's personal, and the timeline can really vary from person to person depending on who they are, their own lived experiences, the social circumstances that they might be engaging with. But learning your own values can be a very important tool when you're faced with these challenges. And when I say values aren't tangible. They're not things that we can reach out and touch or see or smell. They're concepts about who we are and what we hold to be meaningful. They're not a destination or a goal, but rather an ever ongoing framework to approach how we live every day. Values are not good or bad or right or wrong. They're just individualized preferences that have developed over our lifetime. And, John, just because you and I might hold different values doesn't make me bad or me good or you good. We have different preferences that are important to us. So as we learn more about our values, if we begin looking at our lives through the lens of those values, it can give us greater flexibility in how we have choices each day when we navigate a life living with MS.
My wife lived with progressive MS, and she often worried about the future. This really isn't uncommon among people with MS, perhaps especially among people living with progressive MS. Are there strategies that might help someone ruminate about the future less and feel more connected to the present moment?
Well, as you said, John, let's just normalize that is a very natural process, that the brain is trying to help the person in this moment figure out how to make the future the best that it can be, even in the context of a progressive condition. To that end, there are some strategies that can help people to be empowered to calm their mind and body. In particular, mindfulness is a practice that's intended to support a person's capacity to live in the here and now, despite naturally occurring thoughts that bring us back to the things that we've already experienced in the past or maybe worries about the future. Mindfulness is the practice of fully focusing on the current experience without judgment and acknowledging the information that is available to us by focusing on our senses. So everybody has a different degree of access to senses. The ones that come to my mind might be taste, touch, sight, smell, and hearing. And, the expectation is that even when we're trying our very best to focus on our attention on these senses in this moment, the mind is going to wander. That's its natural state, is to wander to the past or to the future. The practice is not to prevent that from happening. The practice is to notice when that happens and gently redirect our attention right back to whatever it is we were focusing on, whether it's an object or our breath or the environment that we're in.
In the context of your work, what are motivation and engagement, and how can these principles be helpful to someone navigating MS?
Motivation is an internal process, whereas engagement is the degree to which we put our motivations into action. So you can think of this as, how ready are you to feel like you can actually engage in the task or the choice that's right in front of you? People with MS are often confronted with choices throughout their day that require varying degrees and levels of motivation. And it can be really difficult to navigate, especially when our coping resources fluctuate or they might be low. In thinking about this, motivation boils down to two main ingredients: confidence and importance. When you think about your own motivation to engage in a particular choice or a task, you can quickly assess your own confidence by asking yourself, on a scale from 0 to 10, with 0 being, I have no confidence I could do this, 10 is, I'm absolutely, certainly confident I could do this. How confident am I right now? And you might say something like, I'm at about a 5 out of 10. What the next question could be is, why did I say a 5 and not a 2? This will get me thinking about all the reasons why I believe in myself. What are the assets I'm bringing to this situation? It might even get me thinking about maybe more assets that I didn't originally consider and might help to improve my confidence. I could also then ask myself, not what would move me from a 5 all the way to a 10 in my confidence, but what would move me from a 5 to a 5.5? What would have to change right now for that to happen? Similarly, you can ask yourself the same series of questions around how important this task is. On a scale from 0 to 10, with 0 being this isn't important at all, and 10 being it's the most important thing I could possibly do, how important is this right now?
Can you tell us what the values compass is?
Yeah, sometimes it's helpful to consider our values in the form of a metaphor. And so a values compass is a bit of a metaphor where, as you would think of a directional compass, north, south, east, and west, you can almost imagine that if you knew what your core values, your most important values were, you can use them to help to guide you even through unknown territory. So knowing your most important values can serve as a guide, even when obstacles arise on a journey. If you can imagine a map in front of you, you might be starting at point A and you can envision where you want to be at point B with some goal or some outcome, even if the roads aren't completely drawn in and you might be confronted with detours along the way. When you're facing that detour, you might have a couple of choices to choose in front of you. With your value-based compass, you can then, even if it doesn't lead you on a straight line to your destination, if you make the choice based on what you're seeing from your values, it will likely lead you into the right direction. And if we can make that informed choice over and over and over and bring our sense of our values to each of the choices that we make, it is much more likely that we eventually arrive at that destination we hoped for.
MS can sometimes feel emotionally overwhelming. Even people who possess a strong set of values or feel as though they do, they may wonder whether they could experience a shift in their own values after being diagnosed. Can our experiences change our core values?
Yeah, as we move through life, our circumstances, our commitments, our relationships, our experiences change. And so naturally, our values will tend to evolve or grow with those changes. My values from 15 years ago are certainly not the same exact values that I hold today because they have evolved to meet the demands of a life that has changed. And it's not uncommon that a new diagnosis of MS and the functional changes that come along with that can lead someone to reconceptualize what their values are or reprioritize what's important now.
People who are struggling with their MS may feel unmoored. They may feel that there's a struggle to identify their own values and stay connected to them. Are there strategies that can help someone identify their values?
Even for people who tend to know their values fairly well, might benefit from just every so often checking in with themselves to see, are my values really aligning with my lifestyle? But even for those who have less certainty about their values, what they could potentially do is think about an experience where they felt emotionally well and ask, what was happening in this moment and why was that meaningful to me? So maybe, for example, someone uses their assistive device to navigate a pathway at their grandchild's baseball game, and it allowed them to be there longer and to be present. Maybe they can think about the meaning behind that, and it might lead them to the value of maybe independence. It fostered their independence in that moment, or it led them to be able to connect. So connection is the value that they might be upholding. Alternatively, when we're feeling emotionally unwell, this could be a signal that something is happening in that moment that may be neglecting or violating a value that's very important to us. So a theme I hear pretty often is that really well-intended, loving family member keeps doing that thing for me when I tell them I've got it. They won't stop doing it, and it makes them feel frustrated. Of course it would. So they're really wanting to better understand where is this emotion coming from. Perhaps this is a violation or neglectfulness for a value of independence for that person. And by learning that about themselves, they can maybe even more effectively articulate that to the very well-intended loved one who's missing the mark.
Imagine this scenario. Person A and person B are married. Person A values family and relationships. Person B values status and wealth. What happens when two people in a relationship have different core values? Can they still be compatible?
Such a great question. Even people we are closest to can hold different values. Though when there's trust in that relationship, even if there's conflict, a common goal can usually be found. Maybe not in the heat of the moment, but if we're thinking about learning more about our values, this might be an exercise that couple does, where they compare notes on what they've found about their values in a curious manner, in an open-minded manner. And when we come and approach that conversation with curiosity and interest, it can yield some surprising and maybe even exciting new information and how to more effectively relate with the other person and be a partner that you'd like to be with them. They can likely find better ways to articulate how they're thinking and feeling about conflict with each other and have more productive conversations when those conflicts will invariably arise, as they do in most relationships. In all likelihood, these values aren't completely opposed to each other, and there's probably some way through this exploration that they can find ways to honor both perspectives. So, for example, if one partner who values family connection and the other partner values wealth, one partner is offered two different jobs. One is local to family. The other one is about 2 or 3 hours away, but it pays a little bit better. They might have to think about how to navigate those competition in those values. Maybe through a conversation like this, they decide that, this partner is going to take the higher salary job, though simultaneously they're both going to commit to visiting family more often, honoring both perspectives. Or maybe they're going to take the job that's closer to family, but they're going to commit to finally looking at the budget and trimming out those expenses that aren't so value aligned anymore.
Well, Dr. Evan Smith, I want to thank you for all you do to improve the quality of life for people who are living with MS. And thanks so much for talking with me today.
It's been my privilege and honor, John. Thank you so much for having me.
That's going to wrap up this episode of Real Talk MS. Real Talk MS is powered by the National MS Society. And you can share this episode of the podcast by letting your friends or family members know that all they have to do is point their web browser at realtalkms.com/368. You'll find that link in today's show notes, so you can easily copy and paste it right into an email or a text. And if you have a minute, I hope you'll visit the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store and download the free Real Talk MS app for your iOS or Android smartphone or tablet. It's the best way for us to stay connected. The app will automatically download the latest episode of Real Talk MS. You'll be able to access any of our past episodes. You'll be able to save your favorite episodes, and it's a great way for me to share bonus content with you. The app is free, so I hope you'll download it today. I'm John Strum. Thanks for listening. Stay safe and make healthy choices.